Thank you very much for having me here. I want to thank the Armenian National Committee and the Armenian Assembly for always welcoming me with open arms. I thank all of you distinguished friends for listening. I apologize for reading this. I can recite my story by heart in my sleep, but reading keeps me calm. My name is Astvatsaturian Turcotte. I'm here today as an American, as an Armenian, an elected official, as a daughter, a wife, and as a mother. Most importantly, I'm here today as an Armenian refugee from Baku. I'm incredibly honored to be here today. This is the third time I'm speaking in the heart of our democracy about my personal experience, and it never gets easy. I'm incredibly thankful for the opportunity to speak for my community that still tries to heal, still has nightmares, still finds itself to be the forgotten refugees from the Soviet Union during what seemed like, from West's perspective, a positive thing, the collapse of the Eastern Bloc. For us, it wasn't. What makes talking about this even more difficult is that 75% of my life ago, 2 years of my childhood defined who I am today and now. 30 years later, we are commemorating these events here today, knowing full well that the conflict is ongoing, and the Armenian children, like me, are still in danger of annihilation in Artsakh and in Armenia. 3 of my 4 grandparents were born in Armenia. After World War II, they moved to Baku, Azerbaijan, for work. My parents were born in Baku, and so was I, along with my little brother, Michael, Misha. In the last 100 years of my family's history, we survived mass atrocity in the form of genocide and crime against humanity 3 times. In January of 1990, my childhood died. 30 years ago, I was 11 and a half years old. I remember the day we escaped in Yerevan a few weeks before the final massacre of Armenians, in January of 1990. But the events that destroyed my childhood started much earlier, in the city of Sumgait, a 30-minute drive from Baku, where innocent Armenian civilians were maimed, slaughtered, raped, and set on fire. This happened in February of 1988 as a government-orchestrated attack against Armenian minority. It repeated a few months later in the form of mass atrocity in the city of Kirovabad. That event in Sumgait changed the lives of all Armenians in Azerbaijan. The unclassified recently CIA documents reveal and confirm that background and truth of these government-orchestrated attacks. The separate massacres might have appeared to be isolated to an outside observer, but they were waves coming and going, building in hatred and strength. And during that entire time, we were on edge, and our communities were attacked in single-family events or on mass scale. We spent months hiding in our apartment, hoping that the violence against Armenians would end, but it never did, and it still hasn't. My father was ready to leave despite difficulties of leaving everything behind in the Soviet Union. Trying to find a place to live and permission to work was not as easy as it is in the United States. My mother didn't believe that something horrific could happen to us in an intellectual, multicultural Baku, but something happened to her one day, and we don't know what it was. But she came home and told us that we were leaving. We left everything behind and fled. We barely escaped. My father traveled separately from us that day because he looked very Armenian, and he didn't want to put us in danger. We survived. Many of my neighbors and family friends did not. In January of 1990, my home and everyone I knew were taken away from us by the last pogrom of Armenians in Azerbaijan. The next 2 years, we lived in horrid conditions as refugees. Many of you heard my story and many of my speeches across the country, so I will try to bring it down from the historical background of my family's 100 years of ethnic cleansing and genocide to a very personal story. I've traveled extensively representing my story and 350,000 of Armenian refugees from Azerbaijan. 60,000 of them around live in this country. They are your neighbors, your constituents, proud Americans. You will not find them being too political or speaking about their past. They are building their lives, putting their kids through college and trying to live a typical American life. But everywhere I go, this story repeats itself. The trauma is compounded by denial. The trauma is compounded by continued aggression against Artsakh. The trauma of my people continues when Azerbaijan comes to our new country, United States, and spreads lies about Armenians. This is anti-Armenianism. It's been 30 years, yet I remember these violent days as if they happened yesterday. I can close my eyes at any time and any day and anywhere in the world and be transported to my house in Baku, the house where someone else lives, a few blocks away from the Lenin Square. I remember the smell of the sea walking the Caspian Seaside Boulevard. I can count the number of olive trees in front of my house on the way to school number 27. I can also remember the utter terror of being injured by a grown Azerbaijani neighbor whose arms I scratched and hit to get away from his sweaty grip. I was told not to tell my father then until we came to the United States. My grandmother explained to me that if I told my father that he would avenge my attempted rape or go to the police, and we will all die if he does that, because we were Armenian. I imagine the sweet faces of my neighbors and relatives as if I saw them yesterday. I remember walking down the street with my face down to hide my distinct Armenian features. My father said if I was asked if I was Armenian, to tell them that I was Greek. I remember my uncle Alexander, who was badly injured, trying to retrieve valuables from his apartment. He didn't realize that it was already being looted by Azeri government, ready to empty or move into 10,000 of Armenian homes. I remember beautiful Jana, my best friend's mother. She died in January of 1990 at 35 years old at the hands of violent Azeri thugs. Her mother, Lilia, she also died of her injuries and of the broken heart to lose her daughter to such violence a few months later. Her son, my best friend Lilia, he grew up with debilitating memories, and he lives in Russia today, complete orphaned. A stranger lives in my house. My neighbors were killed. My grandparents' graves were bulldozed over, as were all Armenian graves wiping out entire cemeteries. Today, I'm wearing my grandmother's ring because I can't go to her grave. Our friends and relatives are now spread across the world, from US to Russia to Germany, France, Latvia, Ukraine, and Armenia. Many of these relatives are strangers to me now. They grew up so far away from each other and almost never get a chance to see each other. Our children speak different languages. So many spirits are broken, and so many lives were destroyed. Lives of 350,000 of us. But we stand here as survivors, as victors. We are successful in all walks of life, all professions, all locations. Many of us have horrible memories of years living in cold and blockaded Armenia, escaping with nothing and losing everything. I'm constantly asked why I left Armenia. If you would see where I lived for 3 years during the war with no hope in sight, you would understand when my father brought us here that he wanted us to have a better future. And he gave us that future here in the United States, the home that I love. Some of our refugees still struggle to find comfortable life in Armenia and Artsakh. Many die waiting. Artsakh, while fighting for its independence from a violent neighbor, also supports thousands of Azerbaijani refugees of Armenian descent, who are forgotten by international humanitarian organizations because they are considered not refugees living in current Azerbaijan. And because it's a frozen conflict, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and other humanitarian organizations are nowhere to be found. It is far from frozen, this conflict, and these people still need assistance 30 years later. With all that said, there's only one perpetrator responsible for this, and my community agrees that this is Azerbaijan. We know Azerbaijan got away with crimes against humanity and mass slaughter, exodus, and theft of our property, and the world, US and Europe included, generally turned a blind eye. As the Armenian pogroms in Azerbaijan were happening, when the Soviet Union was still intact, some of the Western countries issued statements. However, the world continues to turn on a blind eye of these events when talking about further development in the region. peacemaking, whatever that means. The same anti-Armenianism that made my grandfather an orphan and that made me a refugee is alive and well today. Just as with anti-Semitism, rooting out the hatred toward Armenians cannot be done by brushing aside this history. The avoidance of calling things as they are contributes to anti-Armenianism at the highest level of Azerbaijani government. These crimes continue with shooting across the Artsakh and Armenian borders at civilians. This is the same autocratic Azerbaijan that pardoned and made a hero of a convicted axe-murderer of a sleeping Armenian soldier during a NATO Partnership for Peace program in Hungary. Azerbaijan is treated with kid gloves, yet the US State Department warns Americans of Armenian descent against traveling there. This is the same Azerbaijan that commits war crimes on civilians living in Armenia during the April 2016 war, when not only Artsakh civilians were killed, but also Armenian civilians were mutilated on the border. And the story continues. And that's because back in the 1980s, there was no justice. Back in 1915, there was no justice for the ones that died, no justice for the property we lost. No one but Armenian side remembers us during the negotiation process over Artsakh. No politician dares to mention us when visiting the so-called democratic Azerbaijan that recently proclaimed that all Armenians of the world are their enemy. History falsification, disinformation, and false propaganda realized by Azerbaijan are points of fact within the premises of this very body here. But condemning the ethnic hatred and racism and demanding Azerbaijan to assume responsibility alone, US will assist in curbing its genocidal ideology. Back then, the world turned a blind eye on us because we were nobodies, and we took care of ourselves. We scattered, trying to feed our children, learn the new language of our adoptive countries, build our own futures. The world instead rejoiced at the collapse of the Soviet Union. We had nothing, but now we're here. Now we visit our state and federal capitals and remind the world who we are and what happened to us. We're not going away. We will not allow this history, our history, and the history of Azerbaijan itself to be painted over in the name of convenience. Now I am an American lawyer, an elected official who travels across the world writing and speaking about what happened to my people. I want to tell you how incredibly amazing my life has been since I came here, despite the loss and pain. I'm in awe standing here in front of you, honoring my community. 30 years ago, I was a little dirty refugee girl, and the world did not care for me. The world did not mention my loss on the news, and the world did not care for the region where I was born. The strength in me comes from the sun, the water, and the soil of Sunik, Nakhchivan, Armenian lands where my grandparents are from the memory of my great-grandparents who perished during the Armenian genocide, from the history of my resilient ancestors my father told us about through family stories and art. Until the day I die, I will do everything in my power to ensure my people are safe from mass slaughter, that the country of Armenia and Artsakh included thrives, that Armenians of the world are connected by common love and purpose to survive. I will ensure that the US and European legislators know over and over again, decade after decade if needed, that the same threat that made me a refugee and hurt my loved ones still threatens the Armenian people of Armenian Artsakh. After losing so much, the Armenian people of Azerbaijan stand strong. Azerbaijan wants us conveniently forgotten, and you must never forget us. Thank you.